Okay, great. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, brilliant. It's brilliant to have so many people here today on a Sunday afternoon to talk about can technology save a world on fire? My name's Dawn. I've worked in the tech space for about 5 years or so. I'm currently a partnerships manager at the Wellcome Trust Data Labs, and I'm joined by two brilliant panelists here. We've got Lola, and Lola is a product and design expert, and she's worked for organizations like Tesco and UBS. And we also have Elizabeth here, and Elizabeth is a cybersecurity worker, at Sky. So, can technology save a world on fire? I think we've got a lot to get through in an hour, because I think there's two key elements to this question. I think recently, technology, particularly through social media, has meant that we've been connected to people in ways we haven't before. And actually, we've been able to address some of the big environmental and social challenges through connecting through communities. So, for instance, the Flint water crisis in Michigan, a lot of the problems around plastics in the ocean. All of those sorts of issues have come together through technology, through social media. But at the same time, there's a big problem with the platforms that we're using to connect on. So we know that Facebook, they've had loads of problems with data breaches. We've also got problems with sort of ethics in AI. So I think the question here is really, is technology saving us from a world on fire, or is it contributing to the fire? So I guess my first question for the panelists is, what do you think is on fire, and is technology helping us or hindering us? Elizabeth, do you want to start?
So what do I think is on fire? Basically everything, but I guess like to kind of condense the conversation a little bit. We really have to define fire. I think, like as a community, there's certain things that affect people more than other people. There's vulnerable hubs of communities all over the world. When I think locally in the UK, I do think of the BAME community, just because of the socio-economic context of things. I know, for example, in Tower Hamlets, you're more likely to be born with weaker lungs just because of bad air quality, for example. On an international scale, obviously the Flint crisis, and that was mostly kind of impacted in Black communities. So we know there's an inequality there, and it's socioeconomic, and it's mainly ethnic minorities in these communities. And then we think of the global north and the global south. We know in the West we pollute the most, but who's experiencing the floods, the earthquakes? The coastal issues, who's on the other end of issues like overfishing and things like that. We know what's happening basically, but we just need to define it and see how we can help. And I think the role that technology plays in all of this is spreading awareness. And it seems minuscule, but awareness does create some form of education for many people. I know I didn't even know what Flint was until I saw the campaign kind of thing going on social media. So I feel like while we kind of deem technology a big distraction sometimes, we have to kind of, pay some homage to technology, because it has helped educate us. I know like a lot of us are part of the information age. We like to use things like Twitter, Instagram, not so much Facebook, but Twitter and Instagram are really, really popular, and we see things all the time on our feed. So we use these to, educate ourselves and just feel more informed about things and think about how we can help. And while it's educating us on a smaller scale, it's also helping politicians gain awareness too. Because I know with Flint, it didn't really become a political discussion until it became a discussion on the internet. So we have to think about it from that aspect, I think.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. And actually, I'm here because of Twitter, because I've connected with this community, and I've met so many people through sort of social media platforms. But Lola, I know you've got a slightly different view on this from a product perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think like most of us, I care about the world I live in. I have a child. I need her to not be half robot because she got a mechanical lung in a few years. I'm kind of thinking about how my generations live on. But I think one of the issues that technology has brought to the table is we've kind of created a culture of attention economy, is that everyone's a consumer of lots of information. And that is driving, in part, this idea that it's like an evil. I want us to look at how technology can save us, because you need to move from being a consumer to a producer. And the relationship we have with technology needs to be less like, where things happen to us, but one where we actually take ownership and feel more empowered by it. So I very much am like, I call myself a geek. I get involved, I ask questions, I look into all things deeply. But because of that, I also know that I have a position of privilege. Because when it comes to things like, yes, we've got issues like Flint that become part of the kind of the common agenda of society because everyone's making a big deal about it. At the same time, there's a whole bunch of issues that nobody ever hears about. I was talking to someone today about, I think about 10 years ago, where WikiLeaks released a whole bunch of papers about Shell and their behavior in Nigeria, and something that I'm quite passionate about on the internet, and no newspaper covered it. And it didn't become global scandal. And I think where our world is on fire is where the relationship we have with technology is one where we can't necessarily use it to our advantage, and we can't influence the change that we want to see, whether it's environmental or social or economical. We need to actually recognize that it's important for us to participate in the process of creating the tech that serves us, creating the services that serve us. I'm wearing my Rooted t-shirt. I'm part of the Rooted team. Bring in design, bring in technology to the community, so that the issues that we care about, whatever they may be, whether it's somebody in your community. A good example, I live in Streatham, Lambeth, and there is a street next to mine where apparently the entire street is on WhatsApp. That's what we got told by a colleague of my husband, who is a white woman, and she said, that they campaigned to make it a one-way street because it didn't really work for them, and they've got this great WhatsApp group, and it's active, doing a lot of activism on behalf of their street. Another mother at my daughter's nursery lives on that street, black woman. She did not know about the WhatsApp group. So clearly not everyone on the street is on the WhatsApp group. And it's just another symptom of whether or not you're part of the kind of the power structure that drives technology, or whether you're always going to become prey to it because you're not actually able to participate in changing that. And for me, change starts with us. So we need to think about, our parents all said to us, go be doctors and lawyers and whatnot. It's like, no, my daughter, we're looking at her first computer for her second birthday. We're trying to educate her. She's got Blockchain for Babies as a book. That's a real book, actually. Look it up, go get it. And they do quantum physics, quantum computing for babies as well. But there's a real sense that we need to kind of change our approach to how we engage with technology, so that rather than creating a scenario where our world is on fire, we actually turn the tide on how it affects us and how it affects our community constructively.
Because there is that problem whereby, you could be scrolling on Twitter, on social media, and you feel as though I'm liking things, I'm tweeting, I'm contributing, but it's also about the human connection. So how does that actually then change into action? But I think it's difficult, because I think there are cases where that has happened, but not enough. So how do you think that we can begin to create that change where sort of people of colour are the people who are building the products? Because I feel like this is about a systematic problem in who's designing things. So how do you think we can begin to break that?
It's a really good question. I feel like from the front you're talking about, it sounds like slacktivism a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, slacktivism is essentially where you have a campaign on social media and everyone's like tweeting the hashtag, like, let's do this from their seat, and they're not moving, and that's it. So it literally just remains a word on the internet. It gets lost somewhere on a feed, and it just stays that way. It doesn't actually turn into anything. But we've seen ways in which we can kind of be proactive in being cyber-based active, if that makes sense. So, you can form that hashtag into an actual physical group, a meeting, but also be inclusive in who forms the foundation of that hashtag. So I know with a lot of campaigns, they look like they're run by the same people. Those people don't really seem to look like us, or don't seem to relate to us, or don't seem to be our age. A lot of the time, even, for example, politicians don't really have much in common with us, for example. So it's about being inclusive at, you know, a very, very basic level. And even in the design process, again, I think that's an element of inclusive design, which I've seen some people talking about throughout the day. But it's just making sure that people are represented correctly at each stage. So whether it be a campaign or a technological product that assists in the process of climate change or something like that, ensuring everyone's represented. And by that, I don't mean just, you know, ethnicity, race, gender. I mean, like, of all abilities, heights, everything and anything you can think of. You need to ensure that people of the population can directly envisage themselves in, you know, that group or whatever it may be. And I think a lot of the time when we say, oh yeah, we're being inclusive now, or we're doing this to make sure that we're kind of, you know, more inclined with time and stuff, we're not really thinking about how that can assist everyone. We're just thinking about including one Black person or one Black woman or one woman. It doesn't really work that way. So I feel like we just need to look at the world's population and not see how we can make a ratio, but see how we can translate that into a smaller scale and just be as representative as possible. And I think that's the way to be more inclusive in our approach to tackling issues and bias and things like that.
Yeah, I think this discussion is actually, it feels like it's more about power. It's more about who has the power to include who in what space. So your example about the WhatsApp group in the street, you know, again, that's probably just replicating the power structures that already exist on a local level. But then if we talk about technology on a wider level, it's the same thing. How do we change who has the power? And is it a case that we need to make those spaces more inclusive, or is it a case that we need to be building the things ourselves?
I think it's both. I think I understand that for us it can be a challenge because we often feel excluded. And there is one privilege that I know I have, and I try and use it for good, but I know it's also strange to a lot of people, which is I don't embarrass very easily. And so I will walk into a room and be like, so who's here? And I'm going into the middle and I'm going to look around and I'm going to start talking to people randomly. And I think as a community, we have a collective shyness where we feel like we can't step into spaces and be present and just be ourselves and be part of it. And I think, what if, you know, that mum at my daughter's nursery had started the WhatsApp group? She'd be right and center at it because the issues affected her in the same way. The existence of the WhatsApp group doesn't push her out, but certainly it's something that I think we need to be mindful of, that we may also be self-excluding sometimes because we don't allow ourselves to walk into that room with that same sense of complete ownership of the problem and the situation and how it affects us. So on the one side, I definitely think we are going to need to participate and say, hey, I'm here, I'm available, I should be represented, my issues are valid. I'm way more passionate about we just need to build our own. Like, I genuinely think if you look at, we keep talking over the years, you know, in Black events about how other communities do this, and they do it very well. That, you know, the Jewish community, I think when they talk about their money and the economic power that they have, money goes around the Jewish community quite a long time before it starts to benefit anyone else. That doesn't happen in our community. And the empowerment that we're looking for comes with us taking ownership. So I want to see people getting their side hustle on around tech, because unlike many other disciplines, you really don't need a degree. You really don't need anyone to validate your ability to write a piece of code or build an app or start something. You know, when we had a talk earlier this morning about Satoshi, we actually don't know who Satoshi is. Satoshi could be a chick. Satoshi could be a young Black girl in Malawi. Like, we genuinely haven't got a clue who that individual person is. And it goes to show that they created an identity in order to protect themselves sometimes from the bias and the negativity that may come with what they were doing, but that didn't prevent the impact of their work from taking stage and being an important part of the conversation that we're having today. So I think we can all step into that a little bit more and think about, maybe I could code. You know, I was talking to someone the other day about them learning Python, and I'm like, well, I don't know it, but you can literally go and learn from YouTube. You can literally pick up the tools for technology and technological change yourself. Obviously, there are systemic issues that you do need to talk about, which is, okay, how do you scale from a side hustle into something that has actual impact? And that's where I think digital activism takes its place. That's where some of the founding schemes that we're talking about, that, you know, David, my adopted dad, with Legacy, and some of the other investment vehicles that are targeted towards our community take place, because they're looking for you, but you need to step into that with an offer. And quite frankly, I think outside of our community, businesses are looking for solutions that feel inclusive for everyone. They don't know how to design for us, but if we design for us and them, it becomes everybody's win, right? So there's a sense that if we start with our problems, but we scale up to include other people's, inclusivity going both ways, we may get that sense of control that we're actually looking for. And I think that's a big part of where I would like to see us taking more ownership in sort of tech space.
I guess my question to that is that I feel as though the tech space is moving forward so quickly. So you talked about Satoshi, and that's around blockchain, and also we've got artificial intelligence, and it also feels as though there's almost like a gold rush happening in those spaces. And I guess my concern is that I don't think it's too late, but I mean, what can we do to really accelerate change so we don't see the same problems replicated?
Do you know what? I think this is where I believe we need to also be more lean forward and less lean back. I said at the beginning, we tend to be consumers. We need to be producers. And the pace of change is just being dictated by other people doing it first. That doesn't mean that it's too fast or too slow. It just means that if you're waiting for someone to have done it before you get involved, then you're late. Why aren't we creating? Why aren't we trying to do our own? And we are definitely trying, but I think you shouldn't be intimidated by the pace. You can do whatever you want. And I think when we talk about technological innovators as well, people often talk about Google, often talk about Amazon, often talk about Facebook. None of them were the first to do what they were doing. What they did was they saw what others were doing and where they were failing, and then they stepped into that space to focus on where they thought the real value was. So being late doesn't mean you're wrong or you're left behind. It simply means you have a great set of perspective on what's not working and a problem that you can solve that actually speaks to the need in a better way. So I don't wear that late thing. I think it's just on time, but with the right thing.
I want to circle back a bit to sort of the environmentalism things that you were speaking about, Elizabeth. So I guess it's that question again of you talked about slacktivism. Is it slacktivism?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what sort of steps do you think we can take to begin to have less of that? How can we create these? How do we get the human connection in those areas?
I think one thing is that okay, this sounds a bit contradictory, but while we're getting involved in social media, don't get too involved in social media. Like, don't forget that you're a human being. Because I've noticed a lot, even for example, take your lunch break. I don't know who's allowed phones, like you might be in school, but if you're at work and you're just scrolling through your feed or whatever you do at lunchtime when you're on your phone, you're very far removed from people. So basically, take the example of me just looking at my phone and then scrolling and scrolling. Instead of looking at your phone and scrolling, look at your phone, scroll, look back up, and then just apply that logic to activism on social media. So look at your feed, but then look back up, and then, you know, evoke discussion regarding your feed. That's the best way to do it, in my opinion, because I feel like if you keep, I mean, you can talk via Twitter and stuff, you can tweet people, you can, you know, argue if you want, I guess, but don't forget that there are people around you who also share those interests, and try and bring that discussion to the forefront in real life. Don't leave it as something that, you know, okay, I'm going to go on my phone, I'm going to look at this, switch it off, cool. I'm going to go drive my car and pollute the local environment a little bit, that's cool. Just think of it as something where you can apply that logic to real life. Because, you know, we've done it in school. We've applied, well, some of us have applied logic from school to real life, depending on what we did or what we studied or what we specialized in. Just do the same thing with social media, you know. I don't know how many groups there are for, like, the UK, for example, but I know one, even the Me Too movement, for example, the women who created that, they didn't make sure it was just a hashtag. They made, you know, walks and marches based off of that hashtag. You know, if you want to create a hashtag for the sole purpose of activism, for example, use that hashtag to gain a following, but also, draw that hashtag out and make sure your following follows you through. And it's then when you start to, attract political attention and start to really be a voice in your local group or your local environment or whatever. If it remains a hashtag, it's literally just going to get lost in the sea of the internet. So just try and bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, I think there's a nice way to actually to connect both of those points, because I feel like being online, that's a valid way to actually get inspiration for some of these ideas and some of these areas to create change. But then it is about taking that motivation and applying it to a product. And products can be digital, but managing a community, that's also a product. So it's about taking the inspiration and then not being a passive consumer and saying, I want to contribute and lead in X way. So I think as you were saying, when you're young, you're told you be a doctor, be a lawyer. How do we get people to be inspired to be product managers? In that way.
Just start. So I think there's nothing to say that you should be destabilized off your career focus if your parents are saying be a doctor, be a lawyer, or whatever. But for example, a huge number of blockchain startups are being co-led by lawyers. Why? Because we're talking about contracts and agreements and terms and conditions, and so their skill set lends itself to a technological domain. There is nothing to say that you can't side hustle within tech. Somebody that I admire quite a lot in my discipline is an ex-GP who's now become focused on user experience, and he applies his interest in technology and designing for users to designing for hospitals and healthcare environments. So there is nothing to say that you can't lean into the discipline that either, well, if you're young, you feel you have to follow because there's parental influence, but certainly as an adult, if you have your passions, mix them. Like, this is about, in most cases, technology is an enabler for the life we want to live. So you live that life, but see how tech can come into it. And again, don't always sit in that situation where you feel yourself as a consumer. As a plug for, I believe machine learning and blockchain are two of the biggest things that are going to change the way we interact with tech in the medium term. And I say this and everyone's like, right, yeah, cryptocurrencies, whatever. But I actually mean that where we didn't recognize how the internet, people were saying in late 90s, nobody's going to buy anything online. You don't even think when you Apple Pay. You don't even think when you download or do kind of an in-app purchase. It's just become something that happens. In the same way, we don't necessarily understand how those technologies are going to impact, but the forces driving them and the kind of potential that they see are going to affect us. And you can either participate in that or you can be a consumer of it. I personally believe that they are very, very accessible right now. You can start now, start learning, start talking about it in your household, start playing, start doing boot camps, start doing online courses, you name it, there's a ton of stuff out there. And get yourself more knowledgeable. I don't think it's like someone needs to teach you. It's actually very easy to learn this stuff. You have to go looking for it and you have to be willing to kind of spend a little bit of time learning about it. The final thing that I think we can do is just monetize what you're doing. Like, social media influencers are actually working. I've been trying to record courses for myself and I can't get the lighting right. I can't get the sound right. Like, it's a whole thing. If you are doing something and you want to make sure that you are funded, because if you get paid for something, it's sustainable. It's a no-brainer, right? If you're making money, then it's easy to carry on doing it. If you're doing it for free, then it's easy to fall over the side. Start thinking about, is there a way for you to create a community artifact? Is there a way to talk about it? Is there a way to put a hashtag on it and then get an advertiser or a sponsor? Do what you're doing in such a way that you can try and build some sustainability into it. And maybe that becomes the future business that you're looking at. It doesn't always have to be sort of something that you think is happening in the dark in your own time. And there are opportunities to reach out to communities of like-minded people who are doing the same thing and will help you sustain that. So for me, it's about making sure that people are just taking ownership of their own learning path, and being open to the fact that there is a future for us where we can try and be more empowered by this stuff if we want it.
And I think also sometimes people think tech is just, it's just young people doing it. It's actually about any age. And actually, I really liked your point about someone, you know, training as a doctor or training as a lawyer and applying that skill set to something new in tech. So I think actually that's how people sometimes add the most value. It's not just about saying, I want to work in tech. It's about bringing your own specialism and experience to something new in the field. So yeah, I think that's brilliant. Yeah. Any thoughts, Elizabeth, on that also?
I agree, especially with the point you were making regarding social media influencers. Because
Get paid.
yeah, no, honestly, I spend a lot of my time watching like tutorials on YouTube and stuff, and I'm making these people money. Like I'm sitting through adverts, unless you have ad block, but you're probably still paying them. Even if you click on ad links, you know, if I don't know how many of you guys watch tutorials and stuff, but in the description bar, when your YouTube's like, oh yeah, check the description box. When you click on that link, you're paying them. So there's so much money to be made, like on a local scale. And at this point, there's no limits. Like you could be 15 making YouTube videos on the best revision guides. You could be like, I don't know, 70 and making videos on whatever. It literally doesn't matter. And I think what Lola's saying is a really current point as well, because we've seen people start on YouTube, literally earning, you know, peanuts and going on to be millionaires with campaigns and Superdrug and all sorts. So you can really translate that onto such a bigger scale, and the age of social media is quite great because you can kind of tunnel anything you're interested in into making A, loads of money, and B, spreading awareness of whatever you're passionate about. So it's two birds in one stone.
But can I just go back to the original question that we've been talking about? Because I feel as though there's a tension between consumerism and sort of social good. So we're talking about, can tech save a world on fire? Now we're talking about, you know, it is the idea that we want to just make more money, which is brilliant. But if we're talking about technology and inclusion and tech for social good, I feel like there's always going to be a tension between capitalism. Everyone wants to make money, obviously, but then are we not just creating the same hype circle but just for a different community?
So if there's one positive that I think about the age that we're in now is, one, we can be really, really real. If it's not making money, it's costing money, and whoever's paying is in control. So I'm not saying that you need to be like a number one capitalist and fill up your bank account and whatever, but there's a reason Bill Gates is the number one provider of aid through the Gates Foundation, because he's super rich. And if you want to focus on things you care about and issues that matter to you, then somehow you've got to find the money to fund that, both for your time and for the activities that you think are relevant to that. You know, hosting a website is not free. You're paying for the hosting. Finding an event space, if you're going to feed people, you're paying to feed people. So you can't divorce this idea of doing good and make money a dirty word. It's just not feasible. What I do think is where we've got, you know, like, so ethicists have a problem with the way a lot of technologists talk about tech as if it's like neutral. It's not neutral. Tech has an opinion. Tech creates bias. Tech engenders bias and inequality. But it also has the opportunity to do the opposite. It's about how you use it, and it's about how you allow yourself to be used. You know, there's a saying, if you're not paying, you're the thing being sold. And that is fine, but you need to maybe be more engaged with that and think about how you can use it to benefit the things you care about. And as far as I'm concerned, if, you know, what's her name, Kardashian, can become a billionaire because she's selling lip filler, then I don't see why we can't make £1 billion and focus on inequality in the Black community, because there's enough of us to fund that. If we focused on that as a problem that we wanted to put our money and our attention towards, because it's an attention economy. So I don't see capitalism and activism or social good as opposed. I think we simply need to get to the point where we're thinking about how the money is a necessary part of what we're trying to do, and getting real, because we're not going to achieve it unless it's funded.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. Yeah. Okay, we've had a lot of discussion here. I was wondering if there are any questions from the floor. If you have questions, just put your hand up and I'll repeat it on the microphone. Any questions so far? Okay, I've got more questions. Oh no. Oh, hi. Yeah. So the question was, what do we see as the biggest fire in technology at the moment? Who wants to go first? Elizabeth?
Ironically, obviously working in cybersecurity, I'm gonna have to say data breaches. I've just seen it too many times and on a daily basis. I feel like our data is in a lot of trouble. As technology expands, its awareness of information regarding us also expands. Every day we're typing in a lot of information about ourselves, and we don't really think about the back end work. We don't really think about hackers and things like that. But even on your computer alone, when you're shopping online, your computer knows your credit card, your address, your name, maybe your sibling's name. We're giving a lot of information away, and I think where it gets concerning is how do we contain this information? How do we make sure it's safe? And how do we make sure that we fight threats appropriately without kind of limiting our use of technology as well? You want to keep safe on the internet. You want to keep safe when it comes to technology, but you also don't want to limit your user experience as well. So I think when it comes to data safety, there's a bit of a fire going on. But yeah.
I would add on that. I think the fire that I was going to talk about is the centralization of our content and data, because we don't understand how much we've given away. We don't understand how it's being used, how it's been processed. We don't necessarily recognize the value it has. There are entire businesses that exist just on being data brokers, and they're making money about you. And we don't necessarily have a way to control that at the moment. So for me, the biggest and most urgent problem we have is readdressing that particular relationship. And I think the only way to do it is to kill the experiment we're in now, which is called Web 2, and start a new experiment, which is called Web 3, which is built on decentralized technology. And I can geek you out about that offline somewhere else. But there are ways to take back that control, but we've kind of almost got to be actively invested in doing that work.
I think it's really hard though, because we give so much of our data away, and I think in order to stop that, I think I would just have to be off the grid. I'd have to not use my phone at all. I can't even imagine how I would live my life without giving data away.
Do you know what? I find that what people can't imagine is being responsible for your data, right? So we quite happily allow someone else to look after our information because we don't trust ourselves not to lose it. We don't trust ourselves not to put it in the wrong place or to give it to the wrong person. And I think that's where it feels nice that iCloud is backing everything up, even though we know that can be hacked and gets regularly hacked. Or, it feels okay to just say, yeah, I accept terms and conditions and I don't want to think about it with a bank, even though you have no idea what is actually happening with the information they have about you and your money. There are technologies that can do that job, but we actually need to get to the point where we're doing, let's lean back and be like, other people are better at looking after my information than I am, and be like, no, I hold the keys to my front door and I'm locking it now, or I'm opening a window or whatever. It's like even things like ads, right? You should have a choice about what you see and when you see it and why, but you don't, because you are opted in order to get some other benefit. And I think there's just all these different ways that we need to reframe our sense of control about our information. And if we want to make money from giving away your data, like, I'm cool. If you want to pay me pence every time you want to know where I'm coming from in the UK, then cool, you can have that pence, as long as I get something from it and it's clear what I'm getting from it. So that relationship can even be very transparent, and we'd be in a better place than we are right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I guess my concern with that is if it's okay, I'm definitely for transparency and making people aware of how their data is being used, but I would worry against sort of a transactional service where I'm being paid for that information, because you can understand how someone
else is being paid for your information right now.
but you could get into a situation where I'm in a vulnerable position.
Absolutely.
I want to make money. I'm just going to give a company all of this information about me for that. So I think we need to really work out the models that we use to convey that. And I think it comes back to that sort of product design thing, about who's designing these systems, who are they benefiting, because they're not benefiting the population at large at the moment.
Yeah. And I do think, I said earlier on that I think machine learning and blockchain are going to change the world that we live in. The biggest risk for me that I see and why that relationship needs to change, machine learning is exactly that. It's learning based on existing data. So what we know in this room is that most of that data is biased, it is unfair, it is unequal. So we're almost dictating the terms of our future based on the biases and moral limitations of our past. So if we're not trying to fix that, we're really going to be held way, way back, right? The second part with blockchain is the fact that it does offer us an opportunity to control at a transactional level what information exists about us and what not. And I think exactly as you're talking about that vulnerability, unless somebody is present in the process of designing that blockchain system today who cares about that problem and is willing to say, I want to think about that and therefore put something in that actually prevents that vulnerability from being exploited, you can guarantee that's exactly what it's going to do. So that sense of control that we want to have means that we need to participate in the development of this tech as a means of protecting ourselves from being exposed to the issues that could come down the line.
So we've got about, thank you, we've got about 5 minutes left now. So maybe I thought we could take one more question and then we could have summing up. Any questions from the floor? Yep, in the front. So the question was, what does the future look like for maybe some mature people who are not on the grid, who are not participating at all in tech? I have a bit of an answer to that, and then I can pass it on. I think it's probably one of two things. I think first of all, so as we were saying, machine learning, it runs on the data that's been put in before. So actually, if you're not feeding the systems that data or that information, you could potentially be excluded from things. So, for instance, in insurance, let's say people are talked about almost like a dystopian future where insurance companies could be looking at your Instagram feed, and if you've been sort of bungee jumping, they'll give you lower premium, higher premiums based upon that. If they don't have any information about you at all, it could negatively affect you. So it's that challenge of actually the people who were designing these systems, are they actually accounting for those edge cases of people who are not on the grid at all? But yeah, those are my thoughts. Elizabeth, Lola?
I think there's like two sides of the coin here. I feel like you were saying, Diane, on one side, I feel like you're kind of safe from the risks of technology. So, if you are part of that older or excluded population when it comes to the internet mainly, I guess, you kind of put yourself at less risk of things like hacking or identity theft and things that obviously we're exposed to because we use the internet more just by default. On the other side, sometimes I do worry that there are people being left behind. Even, the discussion regarding like side hustles and stuff when it comes to the internet. There are so many people out there, and I know, like, for example, my grandparents and things like that, who I know they're the greatest cooks, like even better than my mom, okay? But they're being left out from, for example, making a YouTube cooking channel just because they don't use the internet every day. They don't know what YouTube is. It only goes as far as www and that's it. So on one side, I do feel like they're being excluded, but you can think of it as a good thing. But as generations kind of go on, I do feel like more and more we're probably going to have a more like, internet savvy generation that is the older population. By the time millennials, for example, are 60 or 70, they will probably be the most tech savvy generation of older people that there ever was, just by default. So I think things are naturally changing, but I think at the same time it also starts with us. If you have someone who's older in your family, do take time to kind of show them, look, you can do this on WhatsApp or you can do this on Instagram. Obviously warn them of the dangers, but we're surrounded by people of all ages, just bring them in basically. But
yeah, and it actually goes back to your point, Lola, about taking accountability, because I don't think it is actually that hard now to learn about new systems and new technology. So if you are an older person, you can take ownership and say, this is something I'm interested in. I want to explore this. It's actually a bit easier to do that now.
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly more emotional reaction to this, which is I feel older people are being left behind. And I think that there are lots of strategic reasons why this is happening, and there are lots of tactical examples. So take cybersecurity being one. I have an older aunt who I help her to manage a lot of her interactions with the local council. And it ain't good because they're forcing her online when she does not have those skills. And say I do 3-way calls with her, or I do, I'll be on the phone with her, and then we'll be trying to do stuff online. That she's looking for information that I'm asking for because I've been told there's a form we need to fill in, and it's timing out for security. And I'm thinking, okay, obviously the delay exists because we're trying to have a conversation and fill out that form. But the delay also has been imposed because it's like, oh, hackers may be trying to do this. And so they need to. So I think we're actually inadvertently creating more exclusion and discrimination against an older community that even if they wanted to stay offline, she can't access any services that she's entitled to without being online. You actually can't live off grid, because if you live off grid, you may not get your pension, or you may not be able to report an issue in your area. And we have to actually consider this as something whereby, so I focus on user-centered design. I believe that you have to have representation. If you're doing research, if you're validating things, if you're designing with the community, they need to be present. And I think we do need to take account that an older community as it is today, and probably for the next 20 to 30 years before we mature out of it, will not have necessarily the skills and the confidence. And the confidence affects your skill set. If you feel uncomfortable or you feel intimidated by something, you're not going to go towards it. And so we should take ownership of our elders and the people in our family, but equally I think as a designer myself, I believe in recognizing that I may not be the best person to proxy for an older person, so I need to get them involved so that I can make sure I'm appropriately defending their needs and their rights. And I think we could all do that in little ways in order to try and minimize the impact. But ultimately, I don't think it's good for older people. I think we're kind of pushing them out, unfortunately.
Okay, one final question in the back. Can I come back at that? So I think I agree with you in part. So what are we doing to ensure their participation? Yes, there are questions about making sure that people have been getting the training and the services and the support that they have. But unfortunately, the way our world works, there's a timeline on that. So, when the government said, yeah, let's make sure that libraries can do IT training for older people and you can come into your library and start learning how to use things online, they set that timetable as different for the timetable that was going to switch off the offline services. So they took away the lifeline and imposed a condition. And whilst I accept we do need to train and we need to support, I personally believe digital underpins our world and not the other way around. We shouldn't be driving people's behavior by a digital agenda. We should be using tech to support who we are and the things we want to do. And I actually think it is possible to maintain offline support for people within a digital world if that is the best way to meet their needs, at the same time as having a digital infrastructure that works, particularly when it comes to government services, because I'm paying for that. I am paying to make sure that my older family are supported with all of the rights that they absolutely are due. As a commercial business, maybe you struggle to draw the line on that, and maybe it's not profitable. But from a government perspective, hell no, you need to make sure the services are always appropriate for our older people, our disabled people, for various reasons. And so I agree with you, but I do think we need to almost challenge people and say your decision making is leaving people behind. Even if your intention is not to do that, you need to be mindful that that might be actually what you're doing. Yeah. Okay, I think we have 30 seconds. So really, really quick, please.
So very quickly, my thought on this is that in kind of Africa, like as Jean-Z talked about this morning, in Africa we maybe have push factors. So our currencies are not working, our economies are not working. So people have push factors to move towards blockchain. In the diaspora, we don't have those push factors because we have institutions that we benefit from that don't necessarily give us the same issues. So my question is more about what are the pull factors that are going to move us towards that technology? And I'm not 100% sure at the moment that we're clear on what they are. I think, yes, a lot of us are interested in it because we think it offers us a better way to send money back home, but that can't be the only need that we're satisfying. So I do think there's an open question for those of us who bridge both worlds. What are the things that we are doing that benefit us as well? Because it can't always be like fight or flight. You know, at some point there's got to be like a service perspective that's like, this is actually doing good for us, and it also empowers people and supports our economies back home. I do think the one thing that blockchain scares me about, as much as I'm passionate about its potential, is that at the moment the only way you get in is if you have real world money to turn into cryptocurrency, and we know that that's a problem for a lot of people. So the majority of the people who are messing with this right now are already, even in Africa and African communities, they're already middle class because they have the money to buy into crypto. That is the issue that potentially in the diaspora we can help to solve. And then from that, we can talk about what else we can do.
Okay, I think that's time now. But thank you for a really lively discussion, and join me in clapping for our panelists. Thanks.